Hi, if you've been wondering whether you can finish a quilt without using any binding at all, well, yes, you can. There's a technique called bagging out, which is dead easy, and I'm going to show you how to use it. So let's switch over to the other camera. But first, I'm Kim. This is Quilt with Kim. You are very welcome. But let's switch to the other camera and let me show you exactly what's what and how to do it. Here we are then with a picture that I've produced with this applique technique. It's called applique perse, just in case you want to know, P-E-R-S-E. This has been finished with the bagging out technique, and you'll see that there's no binding round the edges here. I have top stitch finished, and we'll talk about that when I teach you how to make it. So there are a few reasons why you might want to be choosing this bagging out technique rather than putting on binding. So first of all, maybe you hate putting on binding, and that's probably as good a reason as any to use the bagging out technique. So go for it. Secondly, maybe you've been attaching lots of embellishments. You've got your wadding on your backing, but your wadding on your top here, but you've got lots of embellishments. So there's lots of messy stitching that you really want to be hiding within the body of the quilt, but you still need to go through the wadding or the backing, where you can absolutely use that technique there, where you need to hide all that stitching in the middle of the quilt. Maybe like this, you've got a picture or a wall hanging where you really don't want the binding to be part of the look, and that is absolutely fine. So here I want the bird and the flowers to do the singing, if you like, and I didn't want the frame of the binding in this particular scenario. So that's a good valid reason, a creative choice. Maybe you're making a quilt perhaps without wadding or batting in the middle. And that's a perfectly acceptable way, by the way. You do not have to put wadding or batting in the middle of every single quilt. Who knew? So if you were making a summer quilt, for instance, you do not need to put wadding or batting in the middle. Or maybe, shout out to Kimberly Johnson. Hi, Kimberly. Kimberly is one of my subscribers, and she was asking about a quilt that she's making for her dog. And the quilt is there to protect her bed from the dog hair and dog paw prints. We all have pets who leave muddy paw prints all over the place. So this quilt is really more for protection, but I'm sure it will look fabulous. I'm looking forward to seeing the photo, Kimberly. But because it hasn't got any wadding or batting in it, maybe it's better to use the bagging out technique on that one. So Kimberly, watch out, because this one is for you. And then finally, on that note, not really a reason why, but if you were going to use it for quilts, what I would say is use on the smaller quilts, smaller sizes of quilts, rather than the larger sizes of quilts. So if you were making a king or a queen size quilt, a double is probably okay, but a king or queen size, you're going to have so much fabric, it's going to start shifting around. So with the bagging out, I'd probably err towards the smaller sizes rather than the larger sizes. Okay, so there are some reasons why we might want to choose bagging out. So let's get on, where did that word go to? Let's get on with how to make it. So let's move my bird out of the way. So we are going to need our 3 pieces, just like we would put a normal quilt sandwich together, but we're going to put it together in a different way this time. So you need your wadding and your batting. You need your quilt top, and if you've been following me for a while, you'll have seen this particular quilt block in another video. When I do the demonstrations, I get lots of little orphan blocks, so I reuse them. So that we've got our quilt top and we've got our backing fabric. All of these 3 are now the same size. Okay, so we treat it just a little bit differently to how we might treat a normal quilt when we're quilt sandwiching. Okay, so we start with our quilt backing. Now I know this looks like it's got a massive ridge in it. It hasn't. It's just the camera likes picking up the minutest of creases and making them look huge. So we've got our backing and we have that right side facing up. Then you want your quilt top, and we're going to place that right side facing down. So your backing and your quilt top are now right sides together. If your backing is a little bit bigger than your quilt top, don't stress it. It'll all sort itself out, I promise. So we've got backing and we've got quilt top right sides together. Then we get our wadding and we place that on the back of the quilt top like that. Okay, so I'm making sure it's all sort of nicely squared up there. Then in this scenario, because I only have a small piece to demonstrate, I'm just going to put some pins in to hold it in place. Okay, like that. Now what you probably want to be doing whilst you're pinning in place is remember where the bottom is. So I'm going to put this pin sideways along the bottom, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. So let's stick some pins in all the way around. And by the way, we are going to do this real time together. So if you want to do this along with me, you absolutely can. Let's put another pin in at the top. So there's our 3 layers all pinned together. This bit at the bottom is where we are going to leave a gap. How much of a gap depends on how big this piece is. The bigger the quilted piece that you've got, the bigger the quilt, the bigger your gap needs to be. So if you've got a full-size quilt, you probably need a good 10 to 12 inches of gap there. Even on this little piece here, probably I need to leave, 3 or 4 inches of gap to sew through. So we are going to go over to the machine and we're going to sew round the edge here. So at the machine then this was our pin that we marked the bottom part of our quilt. You see when you've got the wadding on, it's really difficult to tell which way is up. So I like to use a little pin as a marker. So what we're going to do now is stitch all the way around about 1/4 inch from the edge. Okay, so I'm going to line this up and I'm actually going to lock stitch at the beginning and end of this, and that just makes it a little bit more secure. So my machine is already set up for 1/4 inch. I'm going to start there, and this is nice white thread. So whether you're going to see it or not is another matter entirely. I just have to move the camera out of the way so that you can see. Let's find my paddle. And then off we go. So it's going to do a lock stitch. Yes, you do need your walking foot on because we are going through our various layers. So let's just judge where we need to turn. Now I'm using the edge of my wadding and my quilt top as my guide as to where my 1/4 inch is. Probably one more stitch. There we go. And let's just whiz up there. Okay. Have I got that? Just about. If I was doing this on a full-size quilt, I'd probably be going just a little bit slower. It's just because this is quite a small piece and it would take me going fast. Okay, all the way down. At the bottom, one more stitch there, and then back to, we're going to stop about here, so the gap is going to be, it's about 3.5, 4 inches. Okay. It probably wasn't a good idea doing this in white thread, was it? So we've stitched all the way around. You can see that stitch line there. So let me switch back to my cutting mat so I can show you what to do next. A quick thing or quick note that if you're not using wadding or batting, you just leave that bit out. So you're literally just stitching your quilt top and your backing together, right sides together. So next we take all the pins out. Okay. So that's all the pins gone. And so if I grab my ruler and I'm just going to trim off the edges because they're a bit scriggly scraggly. Is that a word, scriggly scraggly? Should we make it a word? So trim off the edges. This is just 1/4 inch I'm trimming to from the stitch line. And this is why I said at the beginning that if your backing sticks out a bit, don't worry about it, because we're going to get rid of it. Just like that. Okay. I'm going to trim the bottom. Again, 1/4 inch is probably not much there to trim. The next thing I'm going to do is trim off my corners so we can get nice sharp corners. Careful not to cut your stitch line because we don't want that. Do you know, these scissors keep having a wobbly moment. I think it's because I've cut a few too many zips and trimmed the ends of zips, and I don't think it likes it very much. Okay, so stitched all the way around, we've trimmed the edges and we've snipped into the corners. Then we are going to get the hole and turn it through. This is the bagging out bit. Get a finger or the blunt end of your scissors to poke the corners out. Let's see how we go first. So yeah, you can get your pointy little corner bits to poke your corners out. I use this bit of the scissors, but do be careful because you don't want to go through your stitch line. So poke, poke. Okay, and just last corner here, poke all those. And then what we need to do is close this gap. So in order to do that, we have to trim this wadding or batting back a little bit, because if we try and fold that in and attach it all, it just gets a bit too bulky in that seam. So before I do anything else, I am going to get a pair of scissors and very, very carefully, I'm making sure I'm not cutting any of my fabric. I'm going to trim a tiny little bit off this wadding here. And of course, if you've just got quilt top and backing, then you don't need to do this bit here, but it just cuts down on any of that bulk in the seam. Okay. And if you can still see, that's not a particularly straight cut, but if you can still see it's nudging into that seam, then cut it back a little bit further. You're not taking very much off. There we go. That's better. Can you see that it's disappeared inside now? Then after that, it's actually easier if you get over to your ironing board and you turn these in your 1/4 inch. If you give your your seam's a little tug, these edges will fold in very nicely, okay, and give those a good press. So I'm going to grab my iron and I'll show you exactly how to do that. Now, before you have a bit of a heart attack, there is an awful lot, or there are an awful lot of layers of heat resistant wadding right underneath this towel. So don't worry, I am not ironing on my cutting mat. Okay, so if I pull each end, that just helps to stretch it, and I'm going to give that, I'm not stretching the fabric, it helps it to just ping into place. So let's go in there, and then this, can you see how I can put this quilt top over the wadding or the batting? Okay, let's fold that over, give it a press, and then I can press those two together. Can you see how these two edges have now nicely matched? And whilst I'm here, I'm going to give it a good press all over, because that'll help with the next bit. Let's see if I can get rid of this crease. It's not going to go, is it? Let's get that in there like that. Okay, so that is now ready for closing that gap up. So we have a choice now. We can either slip stitch this closed, and then that'll be the end of that. If you don't know how to slip stitch, hold fire and I will teach you how to do that in a minute. So you can slip stitch that closed and leave it at that. If it is a bigger piece, so if I slip stitched this closed and just left that as it is, because this is a small piece, it's probably fine. But if you're going to do slightly bigger pieces, you probably need to finish with that top stitch, like I did on my bird here, where we've got a top stitch finish all the way around, and I did it in the same colour as this fabric here and the backing as well. So if you've got larger pieces, that top stitching will give you an extra level of security. Okay, so I'll show you how to slip stitch, and then we'll top stitch around the edge, and then that is pretty much done. For slip stitching, then definitely need reading glasses. Not going to get very far out of those. I've got my needle threaded just with a single piece of thread or strand of thread, and I've got a knot at the end. Personally, I prefer a knot, but if you want to do a little double stitch, that's entirely up to you. So I am going to start here. Don't worry, I'll bring it up to the camera in just one moment. It's just so I can get the needle in to start. So I'm starting in just where that lock stitch was, where we started and finished the seam, the machine stitching. Okay, let's bring this into camera so that you can see. Okay. So I'm just going to do one stitch into the bottom to get me started. And then what I'm doing is I'm going with my needle straight up into the bit of fabric above where my stitch is. Can you see that? So where my needle is going in is just above the thread where it's come out at the bottom, and I'm going to slide along a tiny little bit and come back down again through the bottom of the fabric. Can you see that there? So let me show that again. Pull it through, try not to get it all around the corners. I'm coming up, so straight up to the fabric above, go along a tiny little bit and then down into the bottom. Oops. Into the bottom there. I'll do one more and then I'm going to speed up the filming slightly. So straight up, slide along a little tiny bit and straight down. The smaller your stitches are, the more invisible and they will be, and the stronger the stitching is. So straight up into the top, slide through, and then I'm coming down a bit, except that bit doesn't want to be stitched. Okay. Sorry, I'm a bit all fingers and thumbs in the way, but it's a bit difficult to sort out the problems without my fingers and thumbs getting in the way. Let's do one more and then I will speed up my camera. Alright, so we're all slip stitched and that's now closed. So if you don't want to do top stitching or you don't need to do top stitching, that's all you need to do. But what I am going to do next is show you how to quickly top stitch around the edge to give it some extra security. So I've got my machine set up with a stitch length of 3.5. That's because we're going through 3 layers and because I want my stitching to show on the top. Now I've just got my standard piecing weight thread in here, so that's your standard cotton thread that you use to sew everything together. But if you want a thicker thread, use one of the 30 weight quilting cottons or 40 weight quilting cottons and they will look fantastic. It's entirely up to you what you do for this bit, but really we're using it to secure this edge, give it a finish, a nicer finish, and just give it a different look and feel. But it is up to you. But for the larger quilts, then I would probably do this as a bit of security because you've only got a 1/4 inch seam holding all this together. So when I am doing this, I don't like to do a lock stitch at the beginning of an end, particularly if your machine does its own lock stitch, purely because it leaves some little threads and they can get caught up. So I lock it in a slightly different way. So let me show you how to do that. I'm going to go for a wider top stitch here, about a 1/4 inch away from the edge, but it's entirely up to you where it goes. But you want it sort of close to the edge, between 1/8 and a 1/4 inch. So I'm just going to start. And you won't see it on the white, but you will see it on the green. And then you're going to have to judge where we are. What do you reckon? Oh, one more stitch. Going around the corners. It's always better to stop too soon on the corners than miss your corner. Okay, so we're coming up to the beginning again. You saw I just snipped off the loose thread. All I'm going to do now is just carry on stitching over that stitch line just for about 1 inch, 1.5 inches or so. And I'll do a couple of back stitches just to lock it, and then that will be fine. So can you see I've got a very nice neat finish here, and all I have to do is cut off that thread on the back. So let's have a look at this in its entirety. Looks good, doesn't it? With this pinwheel and the top stitching around the edge. So we can see the top stitching all the way around the edge here. I can't find, well, there we go. There's the loose thread there. And can you see, doing it this way, you can't see where that lock stitch beginning and end is. So that's how you do your bagging out. Nice and easy, very simple. It's a really easy technique for beginners, but just if you want a different look and feel to the edges of your quilt. I hope that has helped, and I will look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.